Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is my buddy Bill Demain. He's going to talk about an article that he's writing about John Lennon's Give Peace a Chance.
Occasionally with Mojo and classic rock, they will bring in what they call a guest editor. I mean, it's been people as famous as David Bowie and Dave Grohl. The next issue of classic rock that they're working on now, Bryan Adams, the Canadian rock star, is the editor. And one of Brian's requests was, I'd like to do a whole feature on songs about peace. I'm writing about Wind of Change by the Scorpions, but probably the most famous song of peace is Give Peace a Chance by John Lennon. So I've been working on a feature about that. And I will say first that, I'm a huge Beatles fan. When I was in Montreal about 4 years ago, I found the Hotel Ren Elizabeth, where that song was recorded. And I went to the hotel and I used my Mojo credentials to sort of impress them, I don't know if it did, but they arranged for a time for me to visit the room, which is no longer, a room where people stay, but yeah, I think they were turning it into a display, like a kind of museum-esque display. Anyway, I got to go in there and spend, 10 minutes looking around, and it looks exactly the same. I mean, the bed piece, hairpiece signs are still on the wall. The little 1960s television is still in the corner. And that's where it happened. I mean, John and Yoko were on the bed, surrounded by about 50 people. It was Hare Krishna devotees and friends and students, Timothy Leary, Allen Ginsberg, Phil Spector.
The Smothers Brothers?
The Smothers Brothers. And it was basically one take. John was sitting on the bed with his Gibson acoustic, and he was mic'd. There were a couple mics around the room. Everybody was chanting along with everybody talking about bagism, dragism. And then they get to the chorus, and it was just one big group sing. And again, this is captured on YouTube. I mean, they used to call it in the 60s, it's a happening. I mean, it's spine-tingling to watch that. You can feel the energy of it. And you can still feel the residue of the energy in that room as soon as I walked in. And I mean, this could partially be that I'm a Beatles fan, but I think there's something else going on in there, I always think of Fox Mulder in the X-Files, like he'd walk into a room, it's like, something happened here. I mean, that's kind of how I felt when I walked in that room at the Hotel Ren Elizabeth. I didn't really know much about how the song came to be, and that's what I'm learning about this week as I'm taking notes and doing research. But it was sort of the culmination of about 2 months of performance art and media manipulation that John and Yoko did. Right after they got married, they spent their honeymoon in Amsterdam. They checked into a hotel and they did something called a bed-in, which was kind of loosely based on things that Yoko used to do as a performance artist before she met John. She had a long career as an avant-garde artist. And they announced, we're having a bed-in. And at the time, nobody knew that expression, and the reporters thought, John and Yoko are going to make love in front of us in a bed, because they've just appeared nude on their record, 2 versions. So there was all this kind of, lurid, salacious expectation. And all the reporters from around the world got to this hotel room, and there's John and Yoko in their pajamas on the bed. We want to talk about peace. We have a new peace initiative. We'd like to sell peace the same way people sell soda pop, or food. We just want to repackage it and make sure that people are thinking about peace in their daily life the way they would any other product. It's really canny and smart of them, And it was also a way to keep the word peace, in conversation. And apparently the story goes that one reporter asked John, what do you hope to achieve from staying in bed for a week here? And John just said, really just to give peace a chance. And he wasn't even thinking of it as a song title, but, his songwriter antenna caught it and was like, So from there, they went on to Vienna, and they did this thing called bagism, where they both got inside these white sacks. And again, they met the press, but you couldn't see them. You could only hear their voices. And the message was, if you eliminate the visual and whatever sort of preconceived notions you have about somebody, everybody is on equal footing. It was all these sort of, kind of positive messages being presented through performance art, and the fact that it was John Lennon, still one of the most famous people in the world, made everybody curious, and everybody came. From there, they went to the Bahamas, and it was in a hotel room in the Bahamas that he first started to write Give Peace a Chance. And in fact, again, there's this unearthed piece of video of one of the first run-throughs, just him and Yoko. He doesn't have the verses yet, and he's just free associating and laughing. And as soon as he hits the chorus, like, oh my God, it's just goosebumps. They didn't like the heat in the Bahamas, so they were going to come to America and end their sort of peace tour. But John had recently been busted on marijuana, so the Nixon administration would not let him back in. So they went to Montreal, as a compromise, and they set up in that hotel room. By then, John had finished the song, but he didn't have it memorized yet, the verses, because it's just kind of rapid fire, almost like a proto-rap. When you listen to it, everybody's talking about masturbation, metadata. So he put up kind of cue cards around the hotel room with just big magic marker words, not only for himself, but everybody else in the room could sort of chant along with him. And John being John, he was like, I want this to be a performance. I don't really want to rehearse it. Here's the chorus, just so you know the melody, and you'll get the idea of the rhythm of the verses as I'm doing it. So he hired a recording engineer who came in with a little 4-track, put up a mic on John, and I guess 2 mics in the room to pick up the crowd, hit record, and they did it. And that's it. I mean, it's truly a moment, like it's a revolutionary moment. It was captured on tape, and 3.5 weeks later, it was in the shops. It was pressed as a single by Apple. I mean, that's, especially by today's standards, nothing could ever happen that fast, really. I guess unless it was put up digitally, but back then, that was remarkable. It charted. I mean, people think of Give Peace a Chance as a John Lennon song, but he was still in the Beatles. It was not that long after Abbey Road. It was attributed to John Lennon and the Plastic Ono Band. The Plastic Ono Band was everybody in that hotel room, basically, And what's even more remarkable is how quickly the song became adopted for the peace movement. I think most remarkably, 3 months later, the Vietnam moratorium protests in Washington, D.C. drew 500,000 people. Pete Seeger was there, and he led a sing-along where just all those voices raised on Give Peace a Chance. And Lennon saw it on the news and said it was truly one of the highlights of his entire musical career, And then to college campuses, and it's still sung. I mean, even when Russia invaded Ukraine 2 years ago, or a year ago, there were radio stations across Europe that all coordinated and played this, like 200 radio stations played the song simultaneously as a, protest. It's a powerful piece of music, Yeah, the way that John and Yoko met in 1968 is Yoko was having an art exhibit in London at the Indica Gallery, which was a Beatles hangout. And John went to the exhibit, and there was a ladder that you climbed up a few steps, and on the ceiling above the ladder, there was a little piece of paper with tiny letters on it that you couldn't see from the ground, but as you got closer, and John looked at it, and it just said simply, yes. And I remember in an interview, John said, of all the things that it could have said, it could have said no, or it could have said hippie, or it could have said, grapefruit, or, he said he was so impressed by the positivity of that he thought, I have to meet this person, So as a way to meet your soon-to-be soulmate, it's a pretty beautiful thing that just one simple word, And later he would put it in Number 9 Dream, yes is the answer.